Hello and welcome to the DiCE webinar. My name is Sandra Kröger and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Exeter. In this webinar, I'm going to talk about the benefits and the risks of differentiated integration. The main point that I would like you to take away from this webinar is that DiCE is very much a double-edged sword. DiCE has been welcomed as a way for European integration to progress in a context of greater heterogeneity and growing contestation, commonly we refer to as Euroscepticism, in many member states. Now, DiCE refers to the idea that certain laws and policies are not uniformly applied across all member states, and that some non-member states like Switzerland or Norway may selectively participate in EU policies. So it serves a dual process or a dual aim, that of reconciling heterogeneity, economic, social, cultural heterogeneity on the one hand, but also that of accommodating the political disagreements about how much integration is desirable that exists between member states. However, whilst DiCE has a lot of benefits to it, it also has potential risks and disadvantages to it. And so DiCE indeed very much resembles a double-edged sword. Now, what are the potential benefits of DiCE? Well, there are a number, and I begin with those that relate to the efficient functioning of the EU. DiCE, for one, provides a way of reconciling the desire of some countries to integrate further with the possibilities of others to be exempted from integration if they feel unable because of a lack of capacity or unwilling because of different preferences to integrate. So it works as a pragmatic compromise and facilitates further integration for those who want to move ahead when integrating together is not an option. In that sense, it can also act as a veto buster by creating a centripetal dynamic that can eventually bring those that are initially reluctant to integrate back into the fold at the later stage. Overall then, as regards the effective functioning and efficient functioning of the EU, DiCE can actually ultimately strengthen the cohesion of the EU and move it forward. Second bag of benefits is that it respects legitimate diversity. So DiCE very much has been acknowledged as a way of protecting and respecting legitimate diversity and different national democratic traditions. It does not impose the same decision on all the states, when actually national preferences might diverge when there are some member states that do not wish to integrate in a specific policy. It also enables the implementation of different policy choices according to different national and local preferences. So again, in that sense, by respecting legitimate diversity, it actually stabilizes European integration in times of growing Euroscepticism. One could also say, third, that DiCE promotes fairness because it does allow to proceed in a different way when the conditions aren't the same for all. One could say that it is unfair to treat unequals equally. Universality of law, most of all, may work on paper, but in reality, it can actually deepen the cleavages within the EU and between member states. So it is not always the best idea to apply the same laws universally across the member states. Some countries may be affected particularly strongly by certain measures, or they might be unable to comply with certain policies and laws because they lack the economic capacities. And so because equal law imposed under unequal conditions can deepen inequality, allowing DI may actually help create equality in the long term and thereby support also integration. So DI in that sense fosters equality by acknowledging that uniform rules and policies may deepen rather than overcome inequalities. However, there are also a number of risks of DI. Not all of them will always materialize, but they do exist, as well as not all the just sketched potential benefits also don't always materialize. So again, let's begin by starting to look at how DI might work against the efficient functioning of the EU. Before I was talking about how it might promote efficient functioning. Now there are some ways in which it might work against the efficient functioning of the EU. And so DI, one could say, doesn't take into account the effects of national policies on the EU more broadly. So if a member state does not participate, or several member states do not participate in a policy, they will not necessarily look at how their non-participation affects the effective functioning of that policy for the remaining member states. If decisions are made among a small group of members, the incentives also goes down to find the overarching compromise between all the member states, which are necessary to address big issues. So if you have groups of member states that participate in specific policies, then those member states will be touched in dissimilar ways by those policies, and their aims and policy goals will, as a result, begin to overlap ever less. And that will make it more difficult to reach a compromise eventually. So in that sense, DI can exacerbate the problem of collective action, namely of finding a compromise, of reaching a solution that works for all. It is harder to overcome those the obstacles to a common solution when member states are affected by a problem to different degrees, which is obviously what happens when we have differentiated integration. Also, DI sets member states on different paths of institutional development. Now, we know from neo-functional theory that there are spillover effects that are at work in European integration. And those spillover effects mean that to realize a policy functional spillover, one needs to integrate even more policies that are neighboring, and that, if kept unintegrated, would create negative externalities. Therefore, it is likely that those who go forward and integrate a policy in a club of clubs will actually be moved away further even from those who do not integrate initially, because they are the object of those spillover dynamics, both functional as well as institutional, in terms of institution building. So what might have initially been a small gap between those who decide to integrate a policy and those who decide to stay out will over time become a larger gap. DI also creates legal and institutional fragmentation. I've already just spoken about one way it creates institutional fragmentation, namely by accentuating the differences, the different institutional paths on which DI sets member states that do not participate in the same policies. But DI can also exacerbate legal fragmentation within the EU, posing the risk of an unmanageable constitutional chaos and a subsequent undermining of the EU's legal authority. If the same institutions do not apply anymore to all member states across policies. But if some institutions are created for specific policies that are more integrated than others, DI can also lead to the creation of A and B class citizens and states in the Union, which is very much a concern in Central and Eastern member states, between those groups of citizens that have integrated a specific policy and therefore enjoy a specific set of rights, and others that haven't integrated a policy and therefore do not enjoy those rights. Something that you find illustrated in the context of Schengen, for instance. Finally, DI can create a fragmented economic and regulatory environment for business operating across the entire EU, when some member states are participating in a policy and others aren't. That makes it more difficult for businesses to operate across the EU rather than just in a few select member states. A third risk of DI is that it can create or reinforce domination. Now, it can create domination by undermining the conditions for democratic self-rule through non-participation or self-exclusion from decision-making bodies. This is particularly obvious for non-member states that participate in some EU policies, such as Norway or Switzerland, which participate in the single market, but are not represented in council meetings where those policies are regulated, and which as a result suffer from a lack of representation and influence over those policies to which they are subjected all the same, of course, by their own free choice. There is, as regards member states and their differentiated integration into specific policies, such the Euro or Schengen or defense policy, mixed evidence as to whether the differentiation between member states that do not participate and those that do participate actually do suffer from decreased influence in Brussels. There's some research that suggests that is the case. Member states who opt out of specific policies will suffer from decreased influence, but there's also some evidence that suggests that is not the case. However, it can, all the same, whether that is the case or not, allow an inner group of member states to impose its will on others, those who participate in all the policies, as opposed to those who participate in fewer policies, and condemn newcomers to an inferior status. So it can lead to a situation where the power of those member states that participate in all the policies is strengthened and comes to dominate the course of integration overall. And this, of course, also then strengthens their negotiation position. Those member states who integrate in all policies will find they have a stronger negotiation position, bargaining power when it comes to negotiating new deals, as opposed to those who are not participating in all policy areas and therefore will not be able to talk about those policies in which they do not participate. DI may also create or reinforce divisions. So before I spoke about fragmentation, legal fragmentation, and domination. Now it is about divisions. And this is perhaps a bit a softer notion than legal fragmentation, which is more a harder notion of law fragmentation. So DI can weaken mutual trust between states, especially if it's accompanied by a narrative of ins and outs, insiders, outsiders, us versus them, pioneers versus latecomers, all these kind of narratives. They can create, an us versus them dynamic, which can promote a perception of distance by means of a negative demarcation. In that sense, the I can deepen apparent divides, such as those between the East and the West, or those between those states that participate in the Eurozone and those states that do not participate in the Eurozone. DiCE can also bring about a discursive strengthening of national belonging and identity, and as a result, weaken European identity. And this can actually then lead to centrifugal tendencies as opposed to the centripetal tendencies I mentioned earlier when I started talking about the benefits of DiCE. And is a point that can be illustrated with the example of the UK, who negotiated a number of opt-outs over several years, of several decades, in fact, of integration, which one could claim has strengthened its national identity discourse and weakened its European identity. Furthermore, DiCE can also undermine solidarity between member states. Why is that? Because it does create opportunities for some member states to impose negative externalities on others, as well as, conversely, new opportunity to exploit others by free riding on the provision of their positive externalities. It also risks promoting an understanding of the EU as a purely transactional arrangement, thereby reducing solidarity amongst the member states. If every member state just decided that they will just participate in what is best for them in terms of economic gain, then solidarity also becomes much more loose and depends on the goodwill of member states and whether they accept, they want to help another member state, should that state be in need of help. And again, this can be illustrated with the example of the UK, which, for instance, opted out of the rescue measures in the context of the euro crisis. It did not want to be part of the help that the EU provided to those states who were particularly struggling with the debt crisis. So such a purely transactional relationship is very fragile in times of crisis. Now, in fall 2020, I have conducted an expert survey about the risks and benefits of DiCE. Not all of these risks and benefits that I've just mentioned, but quite a few of them. And I have asked experts that are currently working on differentiated integration or have worked on DiCE in the past, and 95 experts have responded. And I will just show you some of the results of what they said. So this is about the significant benefits of DiCE. And so here you can see the distribution is between 4.93 and 7.6 of a scale where 0 would mean this is not an important benefit at all, and 10, this is a very strong benefit. What they thought is that those arguments that are in favor of the efficient functioning of the EU are rated very highly, with DiCE allowing the EU to move forward being one of the most important or the most highly rated benefit. And likewise, they have been asked about the potential risks of DiCE, and there, overall, those risks have been rated lower, which signals that overall, these 95 experts that I've asked and that have responded, they have found that the benefits of DiCE actually weigh higher overall than the potential risks of DiCE. Again, I hope this showed you that DiCE is very much a double-edged sword, in theory anyway. How it plays out is an object of empirical analysis. Thanks for watching this, and don't miss the other DiCE webinars.